Hi, welcome to the first Ask the Expert of 2021. And I could not be more excited about my guest today. When I first met Donna Lichaw, we were up at GIC, which is this incredible place in Cape Cod, and she was attending a visual leadership intensive I was giving. I felt immediately Donna understood the power of visuals and storytelling and was just a kindred spirit. And that might be because later I learned that Donna, like me, kind of came to the work we do from a different path. She has a background in radio and film, a BA in film studies, and was a documentary filmmaker before turning to technology. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Donna's background in a minute, but welcome, Donna.
Thanks, Nora. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So before we get started, just a little bit more about Donna's background. Is she's a leadership coach, a speaker, and a facilitator, and she's worked with, maybe some companies you heard of like Amazon, Autodesk, Disney, Google, MasterCard, Trello, Twitter. Really incredible roster. And she's also taught design, strategy, and emerging technology courses at NYU, Parsons School, Northwest University, and the School of Visual Arts. Like, all really impressive. She also is an author as well. We can talk more about that. So Donna, thanks for being here. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you about all sorts of things. In the leadership space, there's a lot of conversation around storytelling, and storytelling is really powerful. But what I'd love to hear about for you is you have a different approach to how you think about storytelling and use storytelling with leaders.
I do. I think there is a lot of talk in the business world and especially in the leadership world about storytelling as a skill that all leaders should have, or that even all people who work at jobs should have. And the thing is that the background I come from, which is I was as you mentioned, a filmmaker before I worked in tech. And what I did in the tech world for about 20 years was helping companies find the stories in their products so that they could build more compelling, engaging experiences that their users and their customers would ultimately have with the product. And storytelling was only one tiny, tiny little piece of that. Like maybe you'd give a pitch or a presentation and there would be a story arc to that. But the way that I saw it is that stories governed every way we think about a product and ultimately build a product. And so, in that world, storytelling was never the focus of my work. I called it story making or story mapping. It was really about seeing stories everywhere from your customers and internally, and then building those stories. And what I've seen over the years as I was working with people higher and higher up in leadership is that, a lot of people are obsessed with this idea, again, of storytelling. But as a leader, the stories you tell are just like, a tiny tip of the iceberg. I think a lot of people like to think that when you tell stories, you can make an impact, and you can. But we're also not that powerful. Like just telling a story is not going to get people to be like, oh my God, you're amazing. I'm going to go listen to you and follow everything that you tell me to do. And
Ted wants us to think that, right? Like,
yeah, it's more than that. And so over the years, what I've developed is a way to think of leadership as something as a bigger part of a broader story. And it all starts with the idea of first being able to know your story. And so that's we often call this leading yourself. And so that's knowing who you are and what you stand for, what your values are, what your superpowers are, what your kryptonite is. And then it expands outward towards other people. So those are co-created stories, how you engage with the people around you. And that could be anything from people you manage or people you work with, or people who you report up to or laterally. And then, and again, it's not about storytelling. This is really about how you create experiences that move people to action and get people excited about working with you. And then ultimately, then it expands towards teams and towards the business. But again, if I had one of those like stereotypical, the slides in a slide deck with an iceberg on it,
right.
Storytelling is a tiny tip of the iceberg. It really is about the stories that are in your head that govern how you show up in life.
Right. That's so interesting. So if you said there's a map of storytelling, and it sounds like, maybe the first one is the story that you have about yourself. And so I'm sure there's a lot of questions. We have people joining us from California, Massachusetts, Colorado, New York. Hope you guys are out of the snow. We still are here in Brooklyn. So if you have questions for Donna, post them. Go ahead and post them right in the chat, and we'll get to those. So there's that kind of iceberg analogy that you have. And I think, as you guys can all see, we have Claude Lee here from ImageThink visualizing some of this for us. We're going to talk about visuals and how they intersect with storytelling, because Donna does a lot of work in that space, which is super exciting. But would you say, Donna, then that first story when you work with leaders is that story about themselves? And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'll give you a good example, which is, I'll probably give you several examples today, but the one story that comes up with a lot of the clients who I work with is that I probably work with maybe 80% of my clients are women in tech, women leaders, and it's the thing about being a woman who's in a leadership position in the technology world is that just showing up is not enough sadly for everyone to take you seriously and really see you as leadership material. And so what I often hear from clients when they start working with me, they might have a story like, oh, I'm too quiet to be a leader. Like, I'm not loud enough. I think I need to be louder. How can I be louder at work? And the I'm not loud enough is a story, and it may or may not be true. And so the idea is that when you go back and you unpack what's really going on, you might find that one example I'll give you is you think you're not being loud in meetings, but when you look at what you are doing in meetings, you're maybe here's one example. One of my clients, she would sit in meetings that she ran, and she was afraid to speak up because she was asking herself really stupid questions. And she was a strategist who was in charge of a very large kind of old school tech organization, a lot of IT folks. And she came from this like innovation world, digital strategy. And so she would sit in these meetings with people who had worked in this organization for 30 years. And she would just be like, oh my God, I'm not technical enough. I'm just going to be quiet. And all of those are stories. I'm not technical enough. I'm not speaking up loud enough. And so what we found over time was that when she was sitting there asking herself really stupid questions, that actually is one of her superpowers. But she was spending so much time feeling shame and guilt about not speaking up in these meetings that she was running, that the result was that she was seeming very quiet around her organization. And she was getting people like her manager constantly saying, hey, like, why aren't you being more of a leader? We need you to show up differently. And so once we realized that the asking stupid questions was a superpower, what we saw is that that's why she was promoted into that position in the first place. She was an innovator, she was an incredible strategist, and she was not an IT person. And so the fact that she had stupid questions actually meant that she could bring all the tech people back up several layers into the strategic stratosphere and ask really good questions that got them out of their tech sort of myopathy into like big picture thinking. And so over time, once she kind of started to adopt and experience a new story, which is I am an incredible strategist, the outcome was she ended up speaking up more in meetings and getting taken more seriously across the organization. And her boss was like, oh my God, who is this new person? And so again, it's all about the stories. It's not about trying to be who you aren't. It's about seeing the way you hold yourself back by telling yourself stories, finding the true story, and then seeing how you can experience that and really own that story over time.
Wow, that's a great example, and I'm sure that resonates with a number of people, especially when you're a strategist. You have that kind of skill. You're really moving in and out of areas of specialization that aren't your specialization. Now that you have that example, you want to talk a little bit like what is your method with her or another client in uncovering those stories and kind of, you sort of, sounds like you swapped out one story, I'm too quiet, with another story, which is like, I ask stupid questions because I'm a strategist and this is actually a superpower. And the great thing about Donna and Donna's website, Donna's very generous, is she has a lot of really interesting templates. We're going to talk about how she uses those and the fact that they're visual, hopefully a little bit later. But we'll post later. If you've signed up for Donna's newsletter, you can take a look at some of these templates too. But is there, we pulled one that we thought was really interesting, which was just that sort of story mapping. Is that one that you would use in this kind of situation, Donna, to first get that story of self?
Yeah, so all of the visual templates I have are tools that I've developed with my clients over the last several years. And they're things that have come out of in-person conversations, and that I'm a visual person. And so what you can't see right below me is my whiteboard desk. It's the like, it's the size of a whiteboard. It's just that it's a desk. But I'm that person who has to always be just doodling and visualizing, and you know, and I mean just stick figures, although thanks to you, you've taught me how to draw amazing stick figures that I've now
star people, right?
No, I do the A people, and it's even
A people. Yes,
I do star people.
You can see A people if you're wondering what A people are on Donna's website, because there's a superhero A person. Okay, so I love this idea of the whiteboard desk, which is also in Zoom calls. It's like you can kind of hide it if you need to. Nobody really knows what you're doing. I don't think you should, but you know, some people. So you're visualizing all of this stuff. You're working visually, and so that is not just how you work, because if you look at the work on the tools that you have for clients, they're also very, very visual.
They are, and I think I see everything as a system. I'm a systems person. I'm a visual person. And so when I'm sketching, if a client is telling me a challenge that they're having, and we're working our way back and unpacking it, and which is what a typical coaching session looks like. And then by the end, they're clear and they know their next steps. Sometimes I think in terms of stories, and for me, story arcs are the simplest model for me to wrap my head around story. There are tons of story models out there, and they're all correct. So if anyone here has another model, like a circle model that they like, that's awesome. They're all right. But so sometimes I'll draw a little arc, and I'll just kind of orient myself on it and use that to ask questions. Sometimes when if I have an iPad handy, kind of like what we're doing today, I'll just plug my iPad in, because Wi-Fi is not very reliable, and I'll just live draw on the iPad as if I was whiteboarding with my client, because all my clients are remote. They're all over the world. And so if we were in a room, I would always jump up to the whiteboard and maybe do something, or I'd more likely make them jump up to the whiteboard and write something out. But so when I can visualize something, for me, it's just easier to grasp. And sometimes for my clients, there's an aha moment when they see something written down, even just a visual arc, they see it and they're like, oh yeah, okay, now I see. So all my worksheets use the same framework as well, which is it's usually things that I give my clients to do at home in between sessions when we're not working together.
So there's a great question posted by David Hart I'm going to get to that kind of touches on what you just said about your clients being virtual and how you've evolved the whiteboard, which I think there's going to be people who are interested. They're always interested in how you move, visual tools that were analog to virtual. But I'm curious, because you're working with, leaders in these incredible companies, very successful tech companies a lot of times. How do you feel like people come in and they're already like, yeah, I want to talk all about storytelling and the story I tell myself, and I want to draw stick people, and they're ready to go? Or do you, how do you get them there? Is there any resistance initially? Because that's something that people ask us at ImageThink, because they see the power of what we do, but then they think, oh, well, what about the CEO? How is this going to land with them? And usually people are very receptive, but wondering how that experience been and how you bring people along with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, because I feel like I'm the queen of solving problems that people don't know they have. And so for for years with the product development work, it was the same thing, which is, stories for products was not anything that people ever came to me for. Eventually, over time, once I wrote the book and once they knew me for that, they would come to me for that. But at first, it was initial real problems that I was solving, like, hey, our app isn't engaging our audience, and no one's using it, and we're running out of faith in this thing. How do we build something?
And maybe investor capital. That sounds like a pretty real problem.
Exactly. Yeah. Often investor capital or any kind of funding. And so for me, the answer to that was the story. With leadership development, it's much the same. Usually, if people come to me saying, I need help with storytelling, they're usually not the right client, because oftentimes they just need a presentation coach. And and that's I know some great presentation coaches who I refer folks to. But when people come to me and say, I'm stuck, I was promoted recently, I've been here for about 6 months, or I'm in a new job, I've been here for about 6 months, and I have so much potential to do great things here. Everyone has faith in me, and it's a complete. I don't know if I can. Can I curse here? I don't even know.
Yeah,
I never know with LinkedIn, right? I'm like,
in case you don't know, you can do anything on the internet.
I know. I think something about LinkedIn always makes me feel like I'm being bad. I'm going to be reprimanded. But often, because all my clients work in tech, they come to me and they're like, I have so much potential. My manager says I can do what I want to do, and it's kind of a shit show. I just need help navigating the waters, figuring out how to be the best leader I can be here, and help me. And so when that happens to me, that's a story, but people aren't coming to me for a story necessarily. And so the storytelling pieces, they come in, they're sort of like, it's sort of like my secret weapon. It just comes in as we need it during client sessions. And so one of my favorite ways it comes up is a client will tell me something, and I won't know if it's true or not. And I'd ask them if it's true, and then I'll be like, that's a good story. And then, okay, let's unpack that. And so it more so just comes up. It more comes up. Strategic planning, that's a story for a whole year or a quarter. Goal setting, that's a story. Being stuck, that's a story. It's kryptonite. It's super fun to unpack.
So
it just comes up.
Yeah. I'm interested how there's in the example of the story as I'm too quiet or ask myself stupid questions. Of course, other people involved in that, but that's really, like you said at the beginning, that's like a story itself. I understand that these are all stories, but goal setting or product stories, those are stories that multiple people are involved in, right? So how are those the same or different? If it's, if our annual strategic plan or annual goals is a story, is there any way to think about that or approach that differently because it's now a story that a team or a division or a company shares together?
So if I'll start with one-on-one stories. So what I find, I call them conflict narratives, which is the primary place stories show up between you as a leader and anyone else who you work with. Is can you tell I'm visual? I said I was doing it today, a lot of air hands, but I'm not plugging my iPad in right now. And we've got someone writing for me. This is amazing.
Great, yeah. But you also have like me. I'm just talking to you holding a pen because it's comforting.
Pretty much. It's an amazing thing. But so I'll start with the one-on-one stories, which is you and another person. Now, if you're in harmony and you're both moving together and everything's great, then your story is fine and it's going to be invisible. You'll never see it. That's just the story that you live every day. And a lot of this is based on psychology. What they psychologists tell us is that we're just always looking for stories, and we piece together stories in real time because there's no such thing as real time. Like reality doesn't actually exist because moments are fleeting. And if we couldn't tell ourselves stories as we live through life, we would go insane. really it's like amnesia, like it's called dysnarrativia. It's like a real thing. So we use stories to tell ourselves, to make sense of everything we experience. So the story between you and another person, if it's seamless, it's invisible, great. If there's conflict, that is when it comes up between you and another person, which is in the way that I call a conflict narrative. So one example is, let's say someone reports to you and they're making a lot of mistakes lately, and it's really not good because like it's starting to make you look bad across your organization, because all of their mistakes are now being creating a timeline effect where now you're constantly late with all of your deliverables, and everyone around you is getting angry, and it's all because of this one person. And you've told them many times over and over again, hey, like, please check your work. You really need to double check your work. And that didn't work. So then you brought in a third person to proofread all of their work because it's still constantly happening. And so after a while, this is, I'm using all real examples here, but after, let's say it's been a few months and like this person keeps making errors, what I find is when by the time clients come to me and they're really frustrated, they're saying things like they're being careless. So let's say, Eric is being careless. John is not paying attention. I've heard even, Sue hates her job and I have to be her manager, and she hates her job and I don't know what to do about this anymore. And so those are all stories. So like I'll use the careless version. Eric is being careless. I need him to stop being careless. Now, if you keep telling Eric, please stop being careless, you're not going to find out the true story of what's happening, especially if it's not working. And so what I teach my clients to do is, one, to see the statement like Eric is careless as a story, and to like put their Sherlock Holmes hat on and become a story sleuth, and instead go out, talk to Eric, and find out what the real story is. And often that presents itself as you do it in a one-on-one. If you have routine one-on-ones, great. Otherwise, you need to schedule a special meeting, and that's not fun, but it can become fun in the meeting, which is, it often looks like, hey, Eric, I notice you're, making a ton of mistakes. What's up? And that's it. And then you bite your tongue and you like count to, 10 and you wait till Eric says something, and then you find out what's really going on. And the idea there is that then the two of you you're gonna write a better ending of the story together, as opposed to saying, Eric, you need to stop being so careless, check your work. And that doesn't work. Eric, I'm going to bring in a third party to proofread your work. That doesn't work. But when Eric tells you, oh yeah, actually, I like am really struggling. There's some stuff going on at home and we're having trouble with my kid, and we have all these therapies and I'm completely scattered and overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. That's a different story than Eric is being careless. And it's one that you could easily figure out. So I've seen my clients come up with ways to one time someone ended up taking some PTO because they realized they really can't do this. Another time they realized the person was in the wrong job and they had some learning issues and they shouldn't be proofreading anything. And so, there are tons of things that are really going on, but the trick is really you want to find out what the other person's true story is and write a better ending together.
Great. That's a great question. And that dovetails, I think you might have answered it, but Krista Thompson, hi Krista, at Crosscut Partners was asking, once you know your own story, how do you sort of engage other people to create a better story together? So I see you nodding. It sounds like it's really like not putting your story on that person, but really like asking them and then waiting to hear their version, right? Is it really that simple, Donna?
It really is that simple. I know, that's the funny thing. I got that phrase from when I was working on my last book about storytelling for product development, or story making for product development. I had a screenwriter be one of my development editors for the book, just to make sure I wasn't getting any storytelling stuff wrong, since it'd been so many years since I was in film school. And one day we were at a coffee shop and he went down a rabbit hole of like story structure and this and that, and he puts his pen and paper down and he looks at me and he says, it really is that simple. You have a hero, they have something they want to do, something's in their way, the end, and we both thought it was so
there
funny.
You go.
Yeah,
there we go. Thanks, Todd. It's
Yeah.
on the screen there, right?
There you go. It really is that simple. But in terms of to Chris's question, that how you would show up at, that's one version of like not putting your own story on someone else, like you're careless or you don't care or you don't like this job. But another one is also like, let's say you're leading a team and you're afraid. One of my clients, she was thought she was a smartass. And that's the story that her family told her growing up. You're a smartass. Stop talking so much. You really make people feel bad. And so when she was running her, the way she managed her team was, again, very quietly, because she was so afraid of making people feel stupid. And so when she realized is that, her ability to be a smartass, like that's actually how she could connect with people. So just it ended up being her bringing that story to meetings, and she just started speaking up and she felt confident about being a smartass. And then she realized that one of her superpowers was also being really funny. And so that's how she connects with her team now, by being a funny smartass, and they all love her. And so it trickles out into other people. The last thing I'll say about that, though, is it also trickles from, you can have team stories and other team stories, and they conflict often as well. And especially in the tech world, like a lot of times you'll be like, engineering says, oh, the product team, they hate us. And like product team doesn't take us seriously. Engineering thinks we're stupid. And it's like the same thing. So it plays out on many different layers.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about the superpower again, because Jenny Fu from Ogosport. Hey, I love how many like amazing people are on this call or joining us on LinkedIn. Ogosport is an awesome toy design company. So I know Donna has 2 sons, so you should, if you don't have anything from them, you should check them out. But her question was, how do you discover your own superpower? So in these stories that you have about is it a template, Donna, for discovering your superpower? It's a great question. And another thing that is awesome to talk to you, because we sometimes do visual exercises with clients about their superpower and creating that. So I'd love to hear your take on it, and how everyone joining us on LinkedIn could leave this call and discover a new superpower, like being a smartass. Who knew?
Yeah, there is a formula, and I don't think I have this worksheet yet available. So if you all sign up for my newsletter, I'm going to be releasing it soon, because I believe I have a draft of it. So there is a worksheet for it, but the version that I can tell you right now is that you can know your superpowers in a very straightforward way. And they're not always your superpowers. So, for example, one of my clients worked at a company that like HR would make them identify their superpowers and put it in an annual goals kind of thing, and in their performance reviews. And her superpower was that she was very detail oriented. And I remember her constantly coming to sessions just like, whoa. Just like, I hate details. If one more person tells me I'm really good at details, I'm gonna just like, no more details. And so, her thing was like, she wanted to be a higher level and not the detail person. And so even though she was really good at details, it's not a superpower that she ever really wanted to own. And so the way I find, there are things that you can know that you're really good at, and those are your superpowers. But what I found is that your superpowers, and this is something that I got from Gestalt psychology, that which is where we met at your visual leadership workshop, and where I ended up training as a coach at the Gestalt Center in Cape Cod, which is like my favorite place on the planet. But so there's this idea in Gestalt psychology where if there's something, that a behavior or characteristic that you want to change or do differently, if you fight yourself to change it, like I'm too quiet, I want to speak up, you can fight yourself, or you can see how that behavior or characteristic actually serves you first. Not that you have to keep it, but you see how it serves you, because chances are that behavior or characteristic has been something that you've carried with you your entire childhood. And it's something that you've not only developed over time as a way to cope with the world, but it's become a habit, like a part of you, and something that you can't easily shake like any good habit. And so when you look at what I found is, when you look at these things that hold you back, so I call it kryptonite, just because my clients love when I call stuff use superhero lingo. But when you look at your kryptonite, you can often then find your unlikely superpowers. And so, for example, asking really stupid questions, superpower. I have another client who her superpower is she's the queen of chaos. Is not a superpower she wants to necessarily own all the time, and it's something that you should consider on a spectrum, but it's a superpower. She thrives in chaos, and that's actually why she has her job, and it's a very important job. It's why she's taken seriously, and it also causes her a lot of stress and anxiety. And so the idea is, when you can own your superpowers and make them work for you and use them when you really need to use them, you can then let go of the guilt and shame and then start making real change. And that is either owning them completely and being like, yep, I'm the queen of chaos, like, love it or not, or I'm the queen of chaos, I'm going to use it at these times. And then, like any, I always think of like the Hulk, like any good superpower, like you learn how to use it.
Right.
In your anger, there is your strength.
Right.
You want to use it all the time.
Great power comes with great responsibility. So
yes.
Does it sound like a tip that you might have for Jenny and other people joining us is, if you want to uncover one that you didn't know you had, do you first like kind of look at the kryptonite, like a behavior that you have about yourself that you don't totally love, maybe, or you're not super excited about, and then how do you unpack that? Like, was when you had the woman who was asking the stupid questions, did she make the connection eventually? Like, oh, it's because I'm a strategic thinker. Did that take a lot of prodding? For instance, I'm a terrible interrupter. Like I'm terrible. It's like, it was like how I was raised. Right. So in grad school, I had a professor who called me the blurter, and I totally forgot about it. I was like, he's such an asshole. And then like 4 years ago, I was like, oh my God, sometimes it's like, it's so fast, like what I'm thinking and what comes out of my mouth. Right. So how would you get me from that to like, okay, this is either something that's useful sometimes, not very often. I'm sure, as you could probably ask Sam and Claude, or is it, then you look at the other side of that and somehow find what like that superpower.
So yeah, we can dig in, because the thing about so thinking about that in terms of like, okay, I'm an interrupter, that's a story. The not effective way to rewrite that story is something that I sometimes hear about. It's like, kind of turn that frown upside down. So you could instead, oh, I'm not an interrupter, I'm just very excited about life. You could say that, and you could tell yourself that new story is not likely to be one that your brain is gonna be okay with.
You're not gonna trick yourself into being like, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just like really excited. Yeah, no, your brain is in this. So this is where the neuroscience comes in. There are decades of neural pathways with the old story that can't be rewritten by you just making up a new story and being like, yeah, that's great. So the trick is, and it does take time. Usually with clients, what I'll do is I'll start we'll start in a session, or if it's a workshop, we'll do this in a workshop, and then you need to start experiencing the new story over time in order for you to start tweaking it and testing it and seeing if it's the right one. But in this case, yeah, what I would start with is your behavior of interrupting people. I am curious, so I'll ask you, Nora, I'm curious, if you think about your childhood growing up, I'm wondering how that ability to interrupt has served you.
Oh gosh, now I'm like really regretting that I threw my own example out.
Started. So yeah, can you think of hypothetically, or if it helps, you could think of a time from when you were younger where interrupting people helped you out.
I don't know. I can't think of a time that it helped me out. But my family, I was very loud, so it's sort of like the louder person is going to be the person that gets the attention. So you kind of just like have to go for it, So.
Yeah. So that's how you got attention growing up.
Right, or how you got
heard. You were heard.
Yeah.
You were heard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So if we were doing this in a real, I'm not going to keep putting you on the spot, but if we were doing this in a real session, we would start unpacking that being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And we would look at what being heard means to you, and what you, why you need to be heard, and how you've been heard. And, what ends up happening is, this is a question you asked a second ago, but it ends up being your epiphany about how, once we unpeel the layers of the superpower, then you have an epiphany of, oh yeah, this is just how I've always been heard. I have another way that I've always been heard as well. It's visual. Hey, maybe. So let's say, and I'll give you, let's say we were doing a whole session, and after a half hour, you're like, oh my God, you know what? I'm going to try something. Next time I have the incredible need to interrupt someone, I'm going to grab my pen and doodle, and I'm just going to see what happens there. And then, you might start experimenting with that. And then I would ask you to just, I do have a worksheet for this. I call it the reaction tracker. I would ask you to track your experiment through another Gestalt psychology idea, through how you feel emotionally, how you, what you think about the experiment, and then how you feel in your body. And that'll tell you, how the experiment ran. But it could be, and I'm totally making this up, by the way, but could be after a few sessions, what you realize is, hey, if you can just draw every time instead of speaking too quickly, and then you share your visual with someone, you've now figured out how to still be heard without interrupting people, and then you feel really good. Or it might be something completely different, but that's an example.
Great example. So that's one way to I guess get to an undiscovered superpower is sort of through your kryptonite, right? Which is interesting, because you're right. There's the things that we all kind of know about ourselves. So we're like, oh, these are the right things to say about a great attribute that I have, but probably not the most interesting ones. Or the most nuanced ones. So we have another question.
I'm gonna just cap it off with one thing, and then I want to get to the next question, which is, I think the important part about the interrupting piece is that if we discover that interrupting was your superpower, and let's say visual communication is how you harness that superpower, interrupting is still your superpower, and that's still a really important piece of how you would own being a visual communicator. Because if you look at what Claude's doing right now by sketching, she's actually interrupting our conversation right now. And so, not at this moment, but in general, visual recording is a kind of interruption. And so my point is, with knowing superpowers, is it's really seeing what the core superpower is, and then using that in a way that doesn't, that moves you and everyone else forward and doesn't make you feel bad. Now you can go.
Right. So the core, I'm just going to say that again, because that was great. The core.
I know, it takes. Yeah.
So the core superpower is one that moves you and everyone else along without you feeling bad about it. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, just had to double click on that, because I thought that was a great statement. So great question, Jenny. Now everybody knows my nasty habit of interrupting. If you know me, it's probably no surprise. David Hart asked a question at the top of our interview that I think is really relevant. So I'm excited to put it to you. It says, how have changes in the work during the pandemic updated or changed your understanding about leadership and storytelling? And which maybe brings us to the other topic too, hoping we can click on, which is your post about lemons. But yeah, this is, I think, been, I don't think that there's a leader out there in the last year that hasn't had to face some tough things and really sort of think about how they're leading and how they're showing up. So really excited to hear you tackle David's question.
Yeah, it's a great question. These are all great questions. So I think before the pandemic, or I'm not the only one who calls it this. In the before times, over 50% of the leaders and teams who I worked with were 100% remote. And so it was, I was very used to dealing with distributed and remote teams. Now everyone is 100% distributed and remote. And what I found is that what I think the reason why I click so much with distributed teams previously is now how I help everyone. When you're distributed and remote, the ability to make up stories that get in your way as a leader and as a team is amplified so much because you don't have. So the way that we experience stories, what psychologists tell us is that it's not just but with words, but it's through physicality, through relationships with people. And those are all things that when you're co-located in an office, you are much more able to read the full story. You can look at body language. You can look at, you can whisper, you can hallway conversations or like another way where you get the full story often. And so without that, what ends up happening is you have a lot of email, a lot of Slack, a lot of Zoom calls that are just like completely overwhelming anyway from a different perspective. But there are a lot more chances for you and everyone you work with to misinterpret what's really going on in every situation, which leads to a lot more conflict, I've found. And so it's it just requires extra work to work remotely and with distributed teams to constantly be checking in with people and really finding out, clearing misunderstandings or finding ways to just figure out what's really going on or to like over communicate to everyone. So it's, I find it's for the teams who were distributed before, they have had less of a difficult time adjusting to the remote. Mm-hmm. But honestly, even they're struggling because the distributed teams I've worked with in the past, they used to have 4 times a year, they would do quarterly retreats or offsite somewhere. And they can't do that right now. So everyone's struggling. You really ideally have that in-person time to kind of reset your narratives. And without that, you just have to do so much extra work to see how you're showing up and check in with everyone else.
So what would some of that extra work be? Like how, if that's the case, that we have the tendency to make more of our own internal stories because we don't have the co-experience, or even in your example about the man, right, that was was missing, making mistakes and had to have proofread. If we were in an office with him, we might be able to see every day that he was like visibly upset, he wasn't himself, and think, okay, something else is going on, right? But when you don't have that. So are there strategies, you say it takes so much more work. What are some things like listeners could potentially think about implementing if they haven't already to help bridge that, since we're all in that situation right now?
So there are a few things you can do. One, and I can't believe I'm going to say this because it's not what we want, but I'm going to say more meetings, and I'm going to explain that, which is anytime that what I've seen with the teams I work with is that Slack is probably the number one place where miscommunication happens and conflict happens. Slack and Google Docs comments and like that. and it's usually something benign. Someone types something and then someone on the other end's like, wait, what did they say? Like, oh, they changed their mind again, or and then all that starts kicking in. And so when in doubt, if there's any time where you're like you're triggered and jumping into overdrive and you're like, how could they say that? You need to step back. And you can actually, the funny thing is, because all my clients, like, they're all tech companies, but one thing that they've really, the distributed folks previously, one thing they really got into over the years was picking up the phone, which is kind of funny. I hate talking on the phone, but sometimes you just get on a quick call. Hey, I'm going to call you real quick. And you just quickly check in with the other person. All right, I saw you type this. What did you actually mean? And so That's one version. It could also mean a lot of folks don't have standing one-on-one meetings with their people who report to them and people who they report to as well. And those are typically weekly or every other week. You really need to have standing one-on-ones with folks where you're able to reset and check in. And so that's another thing, because that gives you another opportunity to not always just be out there in the ether. So I would say more meetings, but I would think there's another piece of it as well, which is if you're the type of person. So one of my I was working with a CEO who her thing is her schedule is well, everyone's schedule is staggered when you're all distributed and remote. And so there were times when it was just easier to shoot off emails really late at night in other people's time zones, and Slack messages and Google Docs and all of that at off times, but it never required an actual response from me. It was just like, I got to get it out of my head. And people on the other end were like, oh my God, I keep getting these like emails at 3 a.m. and I can't like, I feel like I need to respond. So that doesn't require extra meetings. It just requires extra communication of letting everyone know, hey, this is how I'm going to communicate, but I do not want to respond until your work hours or something like that. So that's what I mean by extra work. You just have to think about how people are experiencing things, and also always give an open invitation for them to tell you their stories constantly and any issues that they need help with. And that's what one-on-one meetings are great for.
Great. All right. So one-on-ones with everyone.
All the time.
All the time. Watch out for your comments in Google Docs, everybody. So it's Andy M. It looks like has a suggestion too. He says, my team runs a Discord server. So anytime something gets sideways on Slack, we can jump on a voice channel. And it's nice because we can grab a third party as needed. So great suggestion. Thanks, Andy. All right. So Sven has a question back to, as much as I would love to get away from the interrupting, which also sort of bridges, I'm curious about, you mentioned that most of your leadership clients and your coaching clients are women in tech. We, at ImageThink, we work with a lot of tech companies, but certainly aren't internal. But there's been a lot in the press the last year. I think there's that book Uncanny, and a lot of things about how the environment is less than hospitable to all sorts of people, basically, outside of sort of cisgendered white men. Do you feel that there's in terms of superpowers? Sven's question is like, some superpowers are lauded, like listening and empathy, and some are like interrupting or asking stupid questions or not as socially accepted. So how do you kind of turn that around? And do you feel that you see, is there any sort of difficulty in embracing some of those depending on who that person is, what they look like, how they show up at work? I guess there's a lot there. So you could just pick whatever you want to respond to, Donna.
Yeah, there is a lot there, and I really believe that. So I think that people and companies often they'll call something a competency when it's like a surface level. So for example, like speaking up more, like our leaders are like very vocal and whatever. And I think that that's a tactic. Being loud or interrupting is a tactic. It works great for some people, but for other folks, even the women I work with, when you own your superpower, your real superpower, even if it's one that society doesn't attribute to how leaders look and sound, when you own it and accept it, and this is like a energy thing, but it's like there's psychology behind this, which is like you end up owning your thing and you're just more confident. You will stand up taller. You will probably be louder, the irony of it all. You show up how you best show up, and you are most effective at what you do. Not only that, if you're someone, so the clients I work with are typically all already in some kind of leadership position. And so if you're already in some kind of leadership position, you've already been promoted for doing something really well, not for being subpar or not what people want. And so if you can own what you do bring to the table, it just makes everything better. There are times where, if let's say you work in a really toxic environment and you own your thing and it turns out that it's not what your company needs, like, you probably need to quit. So not everyone, some companies, like, for example, the way you make an impact in meetings is having really great written documents. I would totally fail at a leadership position in that kind of company. Written documents are not my superpower, but so you have to own your thing, and then you'll find the right place and the right way that you can ultimately make an impact.
That makes me think like we're bumping up against the A word, which is authenticity, which I have
it's true.
I know, but that kind of sounds like the recipe for it. We don't have to call it that. It's like, be comfortable with the things that you're good at and how you show up, and it'll make it easier for everybody else to accept them. It seems, and that makes sense because Donna, and we only have a few minutes left, but one thing that is really refreshing about the work that you do and how you show up is just this picture, or maybe Matt could put it up, of your 2020 recap post, and you're like, this is where I'm at. And maybe my superpower is having a Zoom meeting while changing my child's diaper, yep. Right? So if we're lucky, maybe the folks that joining us will get to see that picture. If not, you can go to Donna's blog. And then the post after that about the lemon, which, is, I feel like is very different than what you're told as a leader to do when there's a shitty situation, right? So anyway, I'm just going to stop there and let you comment on either of those or that idea, because you make it sound simple, but it does take bravery, and I think in the end, then you're really relatable, as a leader when you do that.
Yeah, there's a certain school of thought. Well, so one, there's the psychology of not pretending like something doesn't exist, but if you can just accept what is and then figure out what you want to do with it, you will be more powerful. You will feel better. And then there's another theory of leadership that is essentially, it's not a theory. It's a lot of people say this. Brene Brown talks about it. I'm sure others do, but there's this idea of bringing vulnerability to leadership. When you do that, you're able to not just empathize with other people, which I think is an important skill for leaders to have. That's why the storytelling, uncovering in conflict narratives and covering other people's stories, that's a way to empathize with other people. So that's important. But you also want to always invite others to empathize with you. And when you show up not with a lack of confidence, but with vulnerability and confidence in your vulnerability, it does invite people to, one, see that confidence, two, identify with that, and three, want to connect with you. And so that's something, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of folks I was working with were just so ashamed of, they would come to work and they weren't feeling very good. And they spent so much energy trying to be chipper for their team, and they exhausted themselves, and they could not be chipper for their team, and their teams were frustrated and they were frustrated. But when they finally started, telling folks, wow, I'm not okay, and who needs a day off? Let's take all day off and, see you next week. That's when the real change happens. So it all comes back down to when I think of stories as an ecosystem, it's knowing other people's stories and knowing your story and inviting a whole ecosystem of stories to happen for everyone so that you all feel powerful and move each other forward.
Yeah.
How's that?
I love
Here's
that.
my story. The diaper
I
pad
love
is
this
here.
picture. It was just up on the screen, and when you go to it,
And
it's like, this is recapping 2020, and you see it, and you like, it tells you so much, you know. And I was like, this tells you so much about you too, Donna. It's just like, you have your work, you have your family. It's like what everyone's trying to do, right? Is just piece it together. And yeah, I think that opening that up, it was hard for leaders, not only what's going on in the world, but also like what's happening right now in my environment, right? As all of those sort of veils and spaces fell. So this was just another example of the power of visuals, and visuals tell a story, because I think this picture was a lot of people's, and still is a lot of people's experience. So thank you for sharing it.
I'm happy to, and yeah, I've got a lot of people thanking me for sharing that as well. I think it's just our experience right now, and that's okay. It's not ideal. It's stressful. It's really hard, and that's okay.
All right, so Donna, thank you so much. Before we wrap up, I just want to give everybody an opportunity to find out how to find you, and if they are interested and want to do more work, what is the best way for them to reach out and get in touch with you?
So the best way to reach out, if any of you want to work with me, I'm always looking for wonderful new clients to work with, individuals and teams. So you can just go to my website, donnalichaw.com, and I've got my calendar. Talk about like vulnerability. My calendar is there for you to book time with me. And so grab time, let's chat. I'd love to meet you. And for the rest of you, if you want to access my entire toolkit, which I release over time for just, it's completely free. Sign up for my newsletter. It's I explain everything I do with my clients. I walk you through exercises and tips and tricks and all of that on how to be a better leader. And yeah, that's on my website as well. And yeah, I think that's it. This was so much fun, Nora.
Yeah, thank you, Don. I have one last question for you. What is an example of a superpower that you unearthed for yourself?
I have many superpowers. One of my superpowers is that I overthink everything. And it's terrible. And it's like the most annoying superpower ever. It drives me crazy. It drives other people crazy. And it's also how I'm an amazing coach. And it's how I built my own business into a really successful business over time. It's how I wrote my last book. It's how I'm going to write my next book on story-driven leadership. I overthink the hell out of everything.
Well, we are all better off because you do. Thank you, everybody. And a couple of follow-ups. Donna and I both talked about principles from the Gestalt International Study Center, an amazing place in Cape Cod, also offering virtual coaching and development programs. So we'll post the link. We'll post the link to how to get in touch with Donna's newsletter. And join us next month. I'm very excited. Two guests that I'm very close to, Mara and Sven from Visuality and the Impact Alliance, are going to be joining us. And it'll be two experts next month as well. So thank you, Donna. Claude, amazing. Everyone, you can take a look at Claude's synthesis of our conversation. They even got some of your A people sort of in there.
Oh,
I'll tribute to.
That's so awesome.
People, as well. So thanks again, Donna, and
thanks, Nora.
Take care, everybody.